Mr. Lee's pre-recorded lecture over the beginnings of ancient Rome. Sorry again that I can't be in class. No big deal though. I'm going to work with you through here. You should feel free to take your own notes as we go through this. I'll end up posting the slides as per usual. But let's kind of break down a few things. Not trying to teach you every little piece of Roman history here, but trying to stick to some of the big ideas, some of the basics to get you going. So, according to legend, Rome actually started in a pretty weird way. Initially, it was thought that Romans kind of descended from heroes of the Trojan War, specifically Aeneas, who had fled to Italy, the Italian peninsula, and later married the Latin king's daughter, as you can see here, and all those offspring and the descendants became Rome's first leaders. On the other hand, there's another legend that has it. Two boys were abandoned by their mother. And as they were abandoned, they were taken care of by a so-called she-wolf and raised the two boys. And they later became known as Remus and Romulus, two brothers who had found the city of Rome. As legend has it, Romulus and Remus did not like each other all too well, and Romulus ended up killing Remus out of jealousy, and thus the name Rome stems from his name. Kind of interesting to think if Remus had killed Romulus, we might be talking about the ancient Remans or Rheme, but history says it was Romulus. Nonetheless, we cannot actually confirm any of this. It's all a legend and has been passed down through much of written history about the Greeks and the Romans. So, I can see here a good little map kind of showing the hills of early Rome. The legend has it they founded the city on 7 hills, the likes of which you can see below. You can also see at the top there Remus and Romulus suckling their mother, the she-wolf, which tells us that this story was kind of silly, right? But a good kind of artist rendition of the 7 hills and what it was founded upon. And kind of looking through some of the key features here, you obviously are met with probably the most well-known, most famous element of Rome, and that would be the Flavian Amphitheater. You guys know it better as the Colosseum. Good interior shot here. Nice little exterior. Of course, over time, the Colosseum has kind of degraded due to weather and whatnot, but you can see that it stood quite high on its full rotunda. Definitely well ahead of its time. We'll spend some time actually talking about that. Here are the ruins of the Circus Maximus. This was kind of like a NASCAR speedway of sorts. People would sit in the grandstands and even the infield, and they would watch chariot races and things like that. The track itself you can't really see anymore, but you can see certain elements of it still today. Here's a nice artist rendition of what Circus Maximus would have looked like centuries ago. And again, you can kind of see some of the remnants here in that first picture. Over here we have the Pantheon. In my humble opinion, probably the greatest thing ever built by the ancient Romans. It still stands today. It's a magnificent place to visit. I do hope I get the chance to someday, but definitely an engineering feat way beyond its time. And we'll actually watch a cool little video on that. Here's the inside of the dome. You can see the oculus. It's always wide open, by the way. Here are the ruins of the Roman Forum. Similar to a Greek agora, this was kind of the open area where people would mingle, talk about all different things, buy, sell, come and read laws, come and read bulletins posted by the government, the whole shebang. Another good picture here of the ruins of the Forum. Here's the Ark of Titus. This has been, in a lot of ways, recreated across the world in several different ways, but this would be the original, the Ark of Titus, the Emperor. And you can see kind of a closer zoomed up view. Just notice the intricate detail. The Romans are definitely going to get that from their Greek brethren that paid attention to detail. Here is a modern day picture of what was known as Palatine Hill. This would have been basically the proverbial rich people neighborhood. The wealthy and important Romans all lived on the Palatine Hill. And of course, elsewhere within Rome, the masses, the mob, they lived in their own little apartments and whatnot. But yeah, if you were rich and powerful and important, you probably lived in this rich people neighborhood. Just aside here, this doesn't get built during ancient times. It's going to come a little bit after, but St. Peter's Basilica there in the Vatican, which of course is home to the Pope, home to the Catholic Church, which again we'll get to later on in our story, but it's cool to talk about when we focus on Rome as a whole. Here's a good image of what remains of part of the Appian Way, or Via Appia, which is the first highway system of the ancient Romans, way ahead of its time. Definitely going to pave the way for future road and highway designs, pun intended. We'll also watch a cool little video about that. Here is an image of the famous Hadrian's Wall up in northern England, southern Scotland, depending on which side you're on. But this was kind of the farthest extent the Romans ever made it in Britannia, and this wall was built as a way to kind of protect any invaders from the north. Still stands today. Go visit it. Looking at some of the aqueducts that the Romans were able to build, they're very, very well known throughout history as being some of the first to design these systems to provide clean, fresh running water to their citizens. Just like with most stuff we've looked at here. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Here's one of the famous Roman baths. They were very well known for that. So, similar to what we did with the Greeks, let's talk a little bit about geography for a second. So, Italy's geography is a little bit different than what we see with the Greeks. Of course, they're neighboring nations, more or less, but where Italy sits is going to have a little bit different geography, and it's going to lead to them developing differently than their Greek counterparts. So, yes, slightly mountainous. You got the Alps to the north. You got the Apennines in the center there, kind of the spine of Italy of sorts. So the mountains are going to act as a nice way of protection from any northern invaders, but also gonna lead to a lot of the different groups of Italians kind of becoming isolated. Before Rome becomes Rome, Italy and the Italian peninsula is made up a bunch of different tribal groups like the Latins, the Etruscans. So these mountains, yes, great for protection, but that isolation is going to lead to different regions of Italy having their own kind of flavor, their own kind of spice. Now, in Rome, there is more farmland than we see in Greece. This is going to allow Rome to support a lot of population on the peninsula itself, but also just going to allow for just better situations and conditions for people to stay there. They will do some trading and some traveling like the Greeks did, but not going to be as forced to go elsewhere like the Greeks were. There's plenty of rivers, there's plenty of valleys, good silt, good way to grow crops and keep things kind of consistent food source wise. But let's not hold anything back here. The Romans, as they get larger, are going to definitely need to import grain from elsewhere, namely from Egypt, just like their Greek counterparts. Now, where Rome sits in the Mediterranean, definitely going to be a crucial thing. Very central location, going to help with trade, with governance. It's going to help them run a big empire eventually. Very, very crucial. So, as we continue our spiel here on the early Roman Republic, probably pretty darn important to talk about how society was structured. The nice thing about Rome, we get two social classes, okay? So we're going to get, they're pretty well known throughout history. You have the patricians. I like to call them the Pats. But patricians, let's call it what it is. They're the rich, the wealthy, the important. They're going to hold most of the important positions within government. The who's who of Roman society. They come from, noble blood, as was said. And then everyone else, they were known as plebeians or the plebes, okay? They did include poor people, but, by modern day standards, they include middle class people. But if you weren't a patrician, you were everyone else. You were a plebeian. Now, one of the lasting legacies of ancient Rome would, of course, be their governing system, and that definitely relates to its republic. Now, early on, we start to see these elements take hold. After the peninsula is consolidated, we're going to see the building up of the republic itself, Res Publica, as it was called. Now, a republic officially, and we talked about this last unit, is a government that has a non-king leader, typically a president, not always, and certain groups of people have the right to vote. So it's democratic by nature, allowing more and more citizens to have the right, but a little bit less widespread than, say, a Greek direct democracy. Now, in early Rome, we're going to see a couple of important positions. We're going to first see, without a doubt, the most important position in the entire republic, at least power-wise, would be the consuls. Okay, you get two. They were elected every year, and they were in charge of the government and the military, kind of like a modern-day president. The next, you have praetors. Okay, these were essentially judges. Okay, and just like nowadays, you have to have high-level judges in most levels of the government. But the Romans kind of streamlined that early on. Now, as far as decision making goes, they had different legislative bodies. First off, they had the Senate. This would be the famed Senate that would hold lots and lots of power. But the Senate was made up of 300 patricians, and they got to serve for life. So, similar to the modern day Senate, you could ideally get elected every as many times as you want and serve for life. But these guys weren't having to worry about being elected. They could hold that position for as long as they wanted. You also had what was known as the assembly, kind of got that idea from the Greeks, and the assembly, just like their Greek counterparts, could elect officials, they could pass laws. They were mostly the wealthy stock within the Roman government. And then later on, we're going to see the Council of Plebeians created. The plebeians needed a voice, right? And they would eventually get that, though it was done away with later on after that. Now, another foundation or cornerstone of Roman republicanism is the role of dictator. Now, we think by modern standards, oh my goodness, the dictator, it's a terrible word, it's a terrible person if they do that. But in Rome, the dictator was essentially this person given emergency powers to do everything and make all the decisions through him. And the hope was that after taking care of a situation, they would return power and go back to their normal lives. And for the most part, that would happen throughout early Roman history. Later on, though, there's going to be some individuals who kind of abuse that, and one of them is named after a salad. So we'll get to that eventually. You can see here just kind of a structure. I'll end up posting this. No need to read through it. Now, one of the other legacies of Rome was the creation of laws that would last and be able to be applied across large territories of land. And the first ones that we kind of get to see were the 12 tables. They would be these tablets written in Latin that would be placed in the forum for everyone to read and to kind of comprehend and understand on their own. Now, this starts about 450 BC and would carry on in its own way, shape, or form all the way through the rest of the Republican days. Very similar to the United States laws, cover trials, property ownership, theft, things of that nature. But thing to note is that initially the 12 tables were meant for a very small farming society. That would have worked great for just Italy itself, the peninsula, but as we'll see, Rome expands, they get large, and thus their 12 tablet laws evolves into civil law, and then that even grows later on into natural law. They just kind of adjusted for the size of their empire as it grew. But we see some key principles that are even found in modern governments. Innocent until proven guilty. You get an impartial, non-biased judge. You get judged by your peers. That kind of stuff we see in modern times. The Romans really streamlined that long ago. I'll post this. We don't need to read through that or anything. Now, the Roman military, quite a big deal. I mean, let's call it what it was. The Roman Republic and later the Empire gets and stays strong because they had more or less the most advanced and well-to-do army in the world at the time. Okay, and they were protected by these groups, 5,000 soldiers called legions. Of course, if you were a part of it, you were known as a legionnaire. And then they were divided down into smaller groups known as centuries. These would be 80 men. No need to bog you down with the details, but Roman military, crucial in how they expand and take power early on in history. Another bit of a graphic here. Won't concern ourselves with that just yet. Another one. So the last little thing to look at here are 3 wars that we're actually not going to talk about bit by bit, detail by detail, because they take quite a while. Rather, we're going to look at what these wars did and how it's going to lead to Rome truly becoming this quote-unquote superpower. So, when the beginning of these Punic Wars begin, Rome was just kind of this upstart conglomeration of people on a peninsula. To the south of them in northern Africa, you have kind of a burgeoning empire known as Carthage. And eventually, they both got pretty big and would run into each other. And ultimately, this would boil into 3 long wars. Well, some would say the third one wasn't as long, but nonetheless, a long time of fighting. Without boring you on details, Rome's going to win every war. One famous instance, the Carthaginians are going to come down the Alps with elephants, going to freak out the Romans, but guys like Scipio Africanus going to save the day. And Rome, most importantly, going to become this dominating force in the Mediterranean. As you can see these maps here, slowly but surely, the Romans are going to really eat up a large swath of territory in the Mediterranean, which, as we're going to come to find out, crucial for what becomes of them later on, their eventual empire. But the Punic Wars truly are this emerging party for the Romans. We are a superpower to be dealt with, and the Mediterranean is more or less ours. So, hopefully that stuff stuck with it. You can, of course, rewind this and go at your own pace, but the hope is that you've been taking some notes over this stuff so that come Friday, we can jump right into the mix. All right. Thanks, guys.